I'm Hartman here with you. Excuse me. And obesity. This new study just came out indicating that obesity is set to radically explode in the United States. We have children who are being treated in utero for obesity. We have, newborns being treated for obesity. We have it's really quite startling. They're looking at 30-40% of Americans, maybe more, who within the next 10 or 15 years, 20 years, will be obese. And right now we're pushing the neighborhood of a third of Americans. And obesity is really misunderstood. People historically, the rap on overweight people has been that they're lacking self-control or some kind of thing like that. And for a while there was the, oh, my hormones are out of balance response. But increasingly it's coming to be understood as a form of malnutrition. So at least much of it, not all of it, obviously, but what we're seeing in the United States and in much of the developed world that is just over the last 30 or 40 years experiencing this epidemic of obesity, and it's really picking up. It's been really picking up steam since the mid-70s or to the mid-80s, when I believe it was the mid-80s when high fructose corn syrup became widely available, and pretty much all the soft drinks replaced cane sugar with corn syrup and things like that. And 5 years later, we're seeing this. After that, the obesity starts. So there's a concept about this that I think is pretty important, and that is that most drugs are not dangerous in their natural form. They become dangerous when they become concentrated. Excuse me. Coca leaves, for example. I was down in South America hanging out in a very rural Aboriginal area, and the people who live there chew coca leaves in Peru, and said, here, and try this. And I'm chewing a coca leaf with a little bit of lime to dissolve the alkaloids out of it. And it was like drinking a strong cup of coffee. I mean, it wasn't even actually that strong. But if you take the coca leaf and you distill the cocaine out of it, now you've got a problem. Now you've got a serious, dangerous, addictive drug. Similarly, opium poppies, all over the world, there are places where they naturally grow opium. People make tea out of it. Not a big deal. But if you refine it and distill it and turn it into morphine, and then turn the morphine into, I think it's dihydromorphine, also known as heroin, it will kick your butt. I mean, it will seriously addict you and change the nature of your life and change the nature of your body's biochemistry and your internal, everything from your immune system to your neurology. Foods in their natural state, I would submit to you, are good for us. Particularly fruits and vegetables. Grains too, probably. If you're just chewing on grains, or maybe a little boiled rice, that kind of thing. But when you refine these foods, when you take 1,000 pounds of corn and you boil it down and you subject to a chemical process and turn it into something, high fructose corn syrup, something that you'd never find in nature. You could walk through the forests and the fields forever and you'd never find high fructose corn syrup. That concentrate essentially it becomes a drug. And it's not just true of corn syrup and corn. I mean, from high fructose corn syrup to highly processed breads and meats, people eating just the muscle meat when instead of the entire animal that they used to eat. For those people who eat meats, I'm not one of them, but I understand some people do. To vegetables. Vegetables, if you buy vegetables that, in a TV dinner. I mean, I remember as a little kid when TV dinners were just becoming popular. And my parents, my mom and dad, thought they were so, ahead of the curve that they bought these TV dinner trays. And we literally used to, and this was like, Louise's parents, her family was completely different. They were just horrified by this trend. And her mother always made sure that they had, good meals that she made from scratch every night. My parents, God bless them, thought that this trend of, hey, let's get these TV dinners and stick them in the oven. This is before microwave. Stick them in the oven, heat them up, and here's all the different food groups, and it's all, scientifically balanced and good for you. And so we'd sit in front of the TV with these TV trays, these TV tables in front of us, and eat our TV dinners while we were watching, Walter Cronkite and the evening news kind of stuff as a little kid. And a lot of that food was so processed. I mean, what processing does, if you're a company that's making TV dinners or you're a company that's making processed foods, here's your pre-done enchilada or your pre-done whatever it may be. Fish sticks, for example, they can take the grodiest piece of fish and turn it into a fish stick because you can't see it, right? It's breaded and fried. They can take the worst falling apart, disintegrating, wrecked vegetables and fruits and turn them into salsa or whatever, and you never know. They put the pink slime into the burgers. It's all about money. I mean, it's very expensive to pick fresh fruit and vegetables out there in the field and then carefully get them intact from the plant to you. It's expensive. It's time consuming. It's a whole lot easier to get a whole bunch of it by machine, and so what if it gets wrecked in the process and mangled and mutilated and a little funky and a little fuzzy? So what? It's a lot easier to pull it together and organize it that way, and then process it, and add a lot of sauce to it so nobody can see where it came from. So the bottom line is that our food has become a drug. It's like, as heroin is to opium, processed food is to real food. And you end up with people living in food deserts. Food deserts are places where you can't get fresh food. Everything, you walk into the store, everything is processed. And the result of these food deserts, and the result of people buying into the TV dinner thing, and the result of the people buying into and increasingly eating in restaurants, this is... We had a guest on the other day who was talking about restaurant workers and pointed out that restaurants are now employing more people than pretty much any other industry. I mean, it's a huge. We've figured out a way to have an economy that works. We feed each other. But what we're feeding each other with, I mean, the restaurants, you say, yeah, I'll have a bowl of soup. Little did you know that soup came in a giant box with a plastic bag lining it. And the plastic is probably full of weird plasticizing chemicals that are hormone mimickers that will cause hormone-mediated cancers. But in any case, it's concentrated. It's a concentrate, and so it produces things like diabetes and heart disease and all this other stuff. Not to mention the cancers that can come from the food additives and the processes that they use to make these processed foods. So next time you drive by a fast food place, just think in your mind. Just imagine you're actually driving by a crack house selling drugs, because it essentially is. We need to make fresh and simple foods available to low-income people and do something to reduce the American consumption of drugs like corn syrup and French fries. I mean, how many times in your home have you made French fries? Just think of all the work that goes into it. Preparing the potatoes, boiling the oil, finding the oil, boiling it. It's just something. People normally wouldn't do that. If we're just feeding ourselves, we don't do things like French fries. But people are eating French fries every day now because they're going to these fast food restaurants. And we wonder why this country is suffering from an obesity problem, which is turning into a public health disaster.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you combine that with the spread in wealth, which also leads to obesity, and you've got a double whammy. I think that there is, and Mary, your phone is just going nuts. Thank you very much for the call. There is an important point about, individual responsibility, and that's the point that the Republicans, that's their mantra. It's all your fault. Whoever you may be, and if somebody's overweight, it's their fault. I don't think it's quite that simple. I really genuinely don't. What we know now is that when people eat high fructose corn syrup, and it's in foods you wouldn't not, you know, it's in ketchup, right? You think ketchup? It's in breads, in some breads, actually. I mean, it's in most beverages. When you eat high fructose corn syrup, it actually alters the way your metabolism works. We have chemicals in our food supply that human beings in our millions of years of evolution, our 165,000 years on this planet in our current form, have never seen before. Our bodies are not prepared for them. And this is why I'm making the comparison to heroin. Because heroin, when you use a little bit of heroin, you know, the first couple times it's like, oh, hey, this is fun, and this, you know, after 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 doses, I don't know what it takes, but after a certain threshold, well, it's the same thing with nicotine. I mean, I can speak from personal experience there as well. I mean, you know, it's just, I smoked cigarettes for 5, 6 years. And, you know, the first couple, yuck. And then, oh, this isn't so bad. And then, oh, my God, I've got to have one. And it becomes an addiction. And I am convinced that that our corporate food system, in the name of profits, has replaced what used to be a food supply that was mostly made up out of fresh foods. I use the example, if you go into a store and buy some soup. 40, 50, 60 years ago, you walked into a restaurant. If you walked into a restaurant 60 years ago and said, I'd like a bowl of soup, that soup was vegetables in the refrigerator 3 hours earlier. Now, if you go into a restaurant, and you say, I'd like a bowl of soup, odds are that what you're getting was shipped into that restaurant in a giant plastic bag inside a box with a valve on the front of it, and it was made 1,000 miles away, and it's got dozens of chemicals in it, and including high fructose corn syrup and other things that are going to alter your metabolism in ways that you're not expecting. And people get started on these things very often very young. In fact, very often they get started on these things in school lunch programs, particularly where they've been privatized by the Republicans, and you get these corporations coming in and providing the school lunch programs. They're taking the federal dollars, and they're saying, what's the cheapest way we can deliver food to these kids? Oh, well, let's give them the most processed foods. Those foods are heroin. They're addictive. They cause metabolic changes that cause people to crave more of them, and then the people just think, hey, you know, I'm hungry. I need to be eating this. And the result is that you've got an epidemic of obesity. Lee in Reed Point, is that Montana, Lee?
Yes, sir.
Hey, you're on the air. What's up?
How are you today?
I am great, but I'll get better. I hope the same is true for you.
What I called about is it's been one of my pet peeves for years is sugar, refined sugar. Yeah. And the way I found out about it is years ago I had a girlfriend, and she told me about a book called Sugar Blues.
William Dufty. I knew William Dufty, who wrote that book. Yeah, Gloria Swanson was on the board of the Children's Village that Louise and I started, and the actress, and she'd been a vegetarian since the 1920s. And William Dufty was a good friend of hers, and he helped partially ghostwrite her autobiography. And I used to go up to New York, and we'd have dinner together at her apartment, and William Dufty was often there. He was a great guy, and he was so spot on with Sugar Blues. And basically the book, for those people who don't know what we're talking about, is a brilliant book that came out in the 70s or 80s. It must have been whenever it was around that time. And it was
78.
Yeah, okay.
79.
Yeah, and the essence of the book was that sugar is a drug, and it's an addictive drug.
Oh, it was
at least for many people.
Fascinating book. He went into the studies how they fed sugar cane to hogs, and they got fat.
Yep.
And then they processed the sugar cane down into a mash and stuff, and then fed it to the hogs, and it killed them.
Yeah, and if you think that...
opened them up and they were bleeding inside.
Right, and when he wrote that book, that was before the high fructose corn syrup had come along. I mean, back then it was cane sugar, and he was talking about how, you know, this stuff is a drug. And again, cane sugar is something that really has only been a part of the human diet for 100 or 200 years. And now we've got this, you know, if you think sugar is bad, high fructose corn syrup is sugar on steroids. And it's even worse, and it's being subsidized with our tax dollars. Lee, thank you for the call. We are subsidizing Big Ag to produce the kind of corn that will produce high fructose corn syrup so that we can poison and addict ourselves to foods that make us obese. This is not right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
And somebody's got to come out and say it, because if we continue down this road of just saying, oh, well, you're fat, that's your problem, we're going to have a big problem.